Hi everyone, it's Ashley Proctor here from Coworking Canada and the Coworking Idea Project. And if you're unfamiliar with the Idea Project, we are an informal alliance of coworking collectives and operators and organizations and collaborative consultants who are dedicated to ensuring the coworking industry and movement becomes more inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible. And we issue a challenge to the coworking world each month in the hopes that you'll think more deeply upon different themes and topics, and we can work together collaboratively to come up with solutions, and that our impact will ripple out around the coworking world, which is internationally. And so this month, we are inviting a friend of mine and fellow Positive Deviant, Jerome Morgan, to issue this month's idea challenge. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jerome. Jerome, welcome, and please introduce yourself for the folks who may not yet have met you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jerome Morgan. My pronouns are he, him. I reside in Western Canada, but Calgary, Alberta, on Treaty 7 land, home of the Blackfoot and the Lakota and the Stoney nations, and Métis Nation 3, Region 3. And for me, I stand on the shoulder of giants of West African and Caribbean ancestry. I'm a griot, a West African storyteller, artist, creative historian, and I'm the founder of Wood Buffalo Strategy Group, a design, research, and consulting company that helps leaders get to better solutions. And I'm also a brother, an uncle, a son, a grandson, a godfather to 7 young, amazing young people. And I also work as a senior innovation manager in the technology and innovation sector here in Calgary, but focusing on Western Canada. And I do a lot of volunteering and community building as well.
Yeah, I have had the opportunity to witness and experience some of your work in community. And recently there was an event that you held at this Social Innovation Hub that really got me thinking about how well you incorporate your values into the work that you do, how aligned the work is, at least the work that I'm witnessing that you do in the world, and how powerful it is. And I was actually thinking about how in the innovation space in particular, how important that work is. And I thought it would be a great opportunity for you to be able to communicate with coworking operators and other folks in the industry to share some of your experiences there and why you think it's important. Maybe we could talk a bit more about inclusive innovation.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Well, first I want to say thank you for having me on your platform. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure for me to share my ideas and who I am and also the work I do in service in community. So thank you for that. And thank you to those listening and wanting to learn about inclusive innovation. And yeah, the title of my challenge is, inclusive innovation, why now is the time. I care about this topic of inclusive innovation because inclusion matters. I truly believe we must invite people that are from diverse communities that are living in poverty or in marginalized communities, equity seeking, to be part of this change that's being fostered around innovation and economy, and they can't be left behind, because there's so much that we lose when everyone is not part of it. And we have to recognize that everyone's experience is not the same, and that we got to create other types of opportunities for them to be part of this. So the knowledge economy and the innovation economy, especially in Western Canada, significant resources are being implemented in that space, in that sector, and I know around the world. Right? It's a digital economy. And so when we look at countries that are not digitized or not having that same access, we're losing so much, not only from a GDP standpoint, but from a social and economic development standpoint. And I think it's incredibly important for us to support those to be part of this sector and for those to be part of this change.
Yeah, it's extremely important, and I think really relevant to the work that a lot of these community organizers are attempting to do in their communities in terms of ensuring that the spaces really are inclusive, diverse, and accessible to everyone. And so there's something that you mentioned in your blog post, which is attached to this video if you haven't yet discovered it as part of the IDEA Challenge, addressing the topic around a rising tide lifting all boats. And I know this is something that in the co-working industry, we say a lot. I've said this before, and usually the context is we're trying to explain to other industries, perhaps, or corporate folks, how the co-working industry is different, how the movement is different, in the sense of, rather than an individualistic approach, which is fairly toxic but ridiculously common, especially in the United States, to a more collective and collaborative approach, and that, when we put our efforts into networks and into this collaborative approach, the idea is that we all benefit from that. But you point out very clearly, and it's a very important reminder as we're doing this work and organizing for the year ahead, that a rising tide does not lift all boats, especially if the boat is already sinking, as you say. And it's a great reminder that not all folks are even in a boat, perhaps. I mean, the assumption is that we all have boats to begin with. And so I'd love to dive just a bit deeper, even though it sounds fairly simplistic, to really, make sure that folks who are doing this work are understanding that point.
Yeah, thank you for pulling that out. Yeah, a rising tide does not lift all boats, especially if the boat is already sinking. And also, as you mentioned, if you don't even have a boat or have access to a boat. And I think we assume that if you are in a resource rich country, or if you are just connected in some capacity, you have opportunity. And that's not true. We come to this work and with different types of barriers and challenges, with different histories that has gotten us to this point in 2023, right? All of our pasts are not the same. And that's incredibly important, that our histories has gotten us here, right? My history is different than other people's history. It's gotten me to the point that I'm in. And that's incredibly important. And because we live in Western thought, we do love to focus on future versus understanding the past. And so, the Sankofa principle, West African principle, it's if you need to look behind to be able to know what's ahead. And so that's always incredibly important for me to always keep as part of my African knowledge systems. And so when we think about this quote, we have to first ask the question of like, who's missing and who doesn't have a boat and who is just trying to survive and swim, and who doesn't have power in our societies and who doesn't have power at our tables. And then how do we start the conversation there? From who are the most disenfranchised folks, and then how do we support them and understand the reasons why they're disenfranchised or the reasons why they don't have access. And a lot of times we think it's because of decision making, or that person or communities don't want to participate, when that's actually so false. And that just feeds into the narrative of certain communities. And so that reinforces certain things, and that's totally not what it is. And so it's incredibly important for us to understand that there are people that are trying to get on a boat, and there are folks that are trying to get access to resources and opportunity, and they just are not getting it. And so this thinking that everybody doing the same thing for everyone is going to work, it's just not going to work. It's just not how it's set up.
Yeah, I think that's really important, again, that we need to think about, our inclusion work, our diversity work, our accessibility work. We need to put on the equity lens, and we really need to think about what we're doing, not only to engage all groups in the work we're doing or to elevate all kinds of leaders. We need to think about what we need to do to make that possible to begin with, that there are so many gaps in these different levels that we've created with these unjust systems over time that we need to work on addressing simultaneously, to ensuring that folks are, being elevated and amplified in the same way. So perhaps while we're on this, you could dive a little bit deeper into what the problem really looks like. I really want to, think in tangibly here, so we're really identifying these issues clearly, and how you would want things to change.
Yeah, thank you. So one, I want to preface that because we're looking at many different diverse groups that have historical disenfranchisement through different systems. Everybody's journey is not the same, and a marginalization doesn't always look the same. So I really want to preface that in the context of if you're a person that's has a disability versus a person that's low income or live in a rural community or racialized or indigenous. So I really want that to be part of the conversation. But one of the key things is, low levels of representation when it comes to Black, Indigenous, people of color, people with disabilities, lower income, rural communities, etc. In the entrepreneurship space, technology and innovation sectors, right? That we also want to look at, and women, right? That's there. Lower levels of race equity and gender-based data that captures the experiences of folks that are in the sector. I think that's also a very key thing, because sometimes because you see some representation, you think it's working, when that's not always the truth, because people's experiences really matter as well. And if they stay in the sector, or if they leave the sector, or if they even want to participate. Low commitment to reconciliation priorities. So that's something that I've been seeing in the innovation economy. It's the idea of this, if we just do it and we create more opportunities in innovation for everyone, then it's going to trickle down and somebody's going to want to look at reconciliation in economics and in innovation and within a wider society. When that's not the case, you actually have to be intentional about which reconciliation focuses you want to cultivate, as well as which communities, Indigenous communities and First Nations communities are you working with to advise you and support you on that as well, so you can better understand how these can impact communities in a positive way. Then decisions about equity-seeking groups without equity-seeking groups. I think there's a lot of decisions and policy that's being made that's not putting communities at the core and at the center. And for me, I have a design thinking background. So the end user, the user of whatever solution that you're fostering has to be consulted multiple times, has to be validated by that consumer group and that user group for it to be valid and for it to actually have a higher probability of working, especially when we're looking at complex systems. And so it's really important for us to always think about that, is that we got to support equity-seeking groups to be part of the solution, and we have to learn with them or from them. And then maintaining the current status quo. I think there is a focus around just, hey, things are good as it is. And we're letting a few people in, and that's part of the problem. We need a full representation. When we look at the populations of our cities and of our countries, of the world, who's not getting full access, and that data has to influence how we shift and move forward, and that has to be the goal, right? We have global majority groups that are minorities within certain countries that, when you pull them together, they make up a significant percentage of the population that are not getting opportunities at all. And I think that reinforces that idea. And then it's incredibly important for us to continue to have to challenge the low levels of funding that's going to these equity-seeking groups like BIPOC, rural, low income, folks with disabilities, women, employment opportunities, high unemployment rates in these sectors, education, access to education and resources, and relationships to those that have power and that control resource flows as well, which I think is incredibly important, especially when we're looking at it from a systems standpoint.
Yeah, those are all really, really essential items, and I feel like we would be talking for hours if we dove deep into each one of them. But one thing I just want to pull from that around the data, because I think the others were very concrete examples and we sort of understand the implication, but with the data, it's a bit obscure sometimes. We think, what's the impact? There was a conversation I had with another Jerome Chang from Blank Spaces, longtime co-working operator based in Los Angeles, who mentioned that, he was looking at different elections in the area. He was running, in his local election. When you start to see the statistical impossibility of some of the outcomes we have, I think it proves and it really brings home the intention of exclusion. And I think that's a really important part of seeing the data, in addition to getting data directly from people with experience.
I agree. And to add to that, you get to tell the story when you have the data or when you don't have the data, right? And so when you don't have the aggregated data, you're able to say, actually, but we've put resources in the ecosystem so anybody has access to it, when that's actually false, right? Usually the folks that get access are the ones that have the relationships, have the close ties to the powers that be, or those organizations that are rolling out that funding. They usually get told when those funding that funding is coming out. So similar to your example around election and getting access to that power, even though you might live in a community, you might not have a relationship with your city councilor that represents your neighborhood, right? Versus other folks that don't necessarily live in your community, have incredible access to that city councilor and is influencing that city councilor to make decisions for their constituents as well. So those are some of the things that are there, especially when you're a marginalized group. You're not necessarily feeling that you're connected to power. That you should be connected to power, and that you should just be happy to even get access. Or that you're here, and that's some of the culture around inequality that's being fostered, is that, hey, you are taking up too much space, right? You don't necessarily always deserve to be able to have access to these things. You should just be happy with what you have, and these are talking points that's part of racism and discrimination, where you're always challenged of why you're always asking for something. You're always wanting more when you already have something, and when it's no, we're a citizen, a land immigrant, we're a person like everybody else, and we deserve the same rights as everybody here. And that's you're being challenged around your opportunity to be able to access your full rights as a Canadian, or as whichever country that you're from.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another great example. I'd like to just maybe move on to the solutions side of this, because I know that we're going to be speaking through this challenge to hundreds and then in turn thousands of co-working organizers and operators around the world, community organizers who are committed to change, who have dedicated their careers to people over profit, and are really also wondering what more they can do. And so I know you've come up with some action items and steps that people can take. What is it you're asking folks to do, or through this challenge, what are we hoping that these co-working operators and other organizations will do?
Yeah, you know what? First, like, I look at things from a micro and a macro, right? So everything is not necessarily on one level. But the big piece is, I would like to see more intentional collaboration with the equity lens, right? So I want more resources flowing to diverse groups and equity seeking groups, and if you're able to foster and facilitate that in a significant way, I think that's a real key, because we'll see change when we follow resources and we follow opportunities. And if those groups that are disenfranchised get access to that power, get access to resources, relationships, etc., skill sets, you're going to see a change in social impact. It's just the way the system works, right? And I would like to see more representation and stronger relationships with the co-working network around the world, right? And in addition to more innovation conversations with equity-seeking leaders and groups and organizations that are doing good work for positive impact. But if I was going to go into just specific, simple things, the co-working community, we know, has been proven to be a crucial network around the world for social and economic development. So it's incredibly important for you to know that, and so that you can then pivot from there. So if we know that we are a crucial underpinning of social change and economic change, then how do we then foster social change for those groups that are equity seeking, and then how do we foster economic change for those groups that are equity seeking as well? And I think if we start from there, what can you do as an organization? I think it helps. And then ask questions, right? For me, I believe questions are better than answers. So asking the questions of which groups don't have access to power within my community, my neighborhood, my region, my city, my country. Ask questions around how can we center their voices? What do they want? And how can we listen and support them to achieve their individual and collective goals? I want for us to actually map and say, hey, where's the race-based data? And if there's not, how are we advocating for that? How are we aligning with those folks that have power to shift and collect race-based data, but that are choosing not to, because there's a reason why it makes it easier for them to tell the same story. And then asking the question, how can we tell a different story? where we are focusing on the people that are disenfranchised, and then also how are we amplifying the things that are working, right? The positive deviant, wearing a positive deviant hat, and so it's about identifying those windows of opportunity where we see people that are getting unlikely outcomes in unlikely spaces, right? And they exist everywhere in the world. So identifying who they are, who are those leaders, who are those communities that are defying the odds, and saying, hey, I want to learn from you. I want to listen. I want to amplify your work. I want to get you more resources. I want to support you, get your message out there so that others can learn and apply that.
Yeah, that sounds like an action plan for an upcoming conversation that we're having at the Co-working Alliance Summit. The theme this year is really who's missing. And we talk about this every year at conferences, unconferences, any kind of board meeting or members meeting that we host internationally or even within our own regions. This is a constant topic, but I think we need to shift this and really think of it as a whole instead of it being a side conversation or conversation that's being held in the halls. The conversations around representation, the conversations around real change in this industry are essential. And so I'm excited to ask those questions, within our own organizations, but then also collectively as a group. The leaders of the industry are meeting in a couple of weeks. It's the perfect time to have this conversation on a larger scale. So thank you for launching that conversation. It's so timely and relevant, and it's essential to all of our work moving forward. There's just so much to cover. I think there are a couple of ways to approach it, and I think we've given people a lot of context, and we've given them some really essential questions to dive into. Is there anything else we think we need to leave folks with?
Yeah. A couple of things. The first thing I would say is, I'm a designer, so whenever we're looking at complex challenges or anything, I start with a how might we. So how might we as a co-working community facilitate initiatives that will open doors for BIPOC, low income, rural communities, those with disabilities, women to participate fully in the innovation economy, right? And start there, and then say, yeah, how might we do that? What does success look like, right? If all these groups are thriving, what does thriving look like in 10 years, right? Thriving looks like them being at the table and planning planning some of these conferences and planning some of these sessions, being on our boards, being there, them telling us, hey, this is what we need to have foster change in our communities, and us supporting them on that. I think for me, it's about one, starting with that how might we question, so and then being able to map what success looks like in 10 years, and then working backwards, having that backwards design. I think about policy, right? What's the policies that are underpinning the status quo, right? What's the resources, decision-making attitudes and mindsets that's holding things in place, right? How do we challenge that, right? The deeper, more harder things. How do we cultivate more people in the conversation? And how can I leverage my contacts, my relationships to be able to support that? And then what's my commitment, right? And for me, like I've been learning about strategy and strategic doing, right? So it's not about putting a strategic plan together, but what can I do in 3 months, in 3 days, in 6 months that I can actually say I did that. And so really mapping out, hey, in 3 days, I can read an article around groups and organizations that are championing this work and they're doing it well, right? I can start to build a relationship around how can I amplify and share this message. I can start conversations. I can access resources and facilitate it to those marginalized and lower income communities. I could then start to build a longer term relationship around what's the outcomes that they want to see. And then I can talk to those powers that be that I might have access to around, hey, what's your vision around equity and diversity for disenfranchised communities? And say, hey, how can we add to that and bring more people into the fold to foster and achieve more positive social impact?
Yeah, I think that's really aligned with last month's challenge as well about like reducing the gap between our values and our actions. And I think that sets us up nicely as an industry and as individuals to tackle these questions in meaningful ways and to really take action. I think it's enough talk. We've been talking about this. We know where our values are. We know what our intentions are. We really need to see action. So thank you for those active questions. and for encouraging us all to do the deeper and more meaningful work.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and look forward to being at the conference and learning and connecting with others. And anytime anybody has any questions or want to reach out to me, they can through email or through my website, www.wbstrategy.ca.
Perfect. And if anyone else wants links or connections, you can go to the blog post at coworkingidea.org and connect directly with Jerome if you're interested in working with him or amplifying the work that he's doing. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all next month and at the Co-working Alliance Summit. Take care.
Awesome. Take care. Bye.